Welcome everybody to today's webinar on engineering change management, the process. My name is John Cachet. Thank you for joining us today. I've been working with companies for about 28 years now, working on business performance, and the subject of engineering change comes up with almost every company, not only internally, but it gets even more difficult when you start looking at supply chains. A few housekeeping issues before we get started. Your phones are muted, so if you'd like to ask questions, please use the question block to the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and copies of the presentation will be available upon request. So why now? Why is engineering change becoming more and more critical to companies? Talking about the process and what's going on, how to identify and eliminate waste in the process. The role of software, if any. There may be some opportunities to use some software, and actually that's part of the challenges. There's a lot of different software companies saying we do engineering change, we do engineering change. But the reality is, because it's not defined well, most companies that say we do engineering change do it poorly. So why now? Manufacturing companies are bringing new products to market faster than ever. And because I'm now trying to bring products to market, if it used to in the good old days take 5 years like the automotive industry, and then we tried to go to 3 and then to 2, if it's cell phones that got to come out every 3 to 6 months, when you condense the product launch cycle by a factor of 2, 3, 4, or 5, any change you make poorly or incorrectly can make or break the product launch. It can damage the entire process. So the need for a rapid engineering change process is a requirement to bring new products to market faster. And the problem is engineering change is often poorly defined, and because it's poorly defined, poorly executed. What people think the process is, and if they drew a diagram, it'd probably be very simple, few steps, maybe a loop somewhere. But what it really is more like the diagram on this slide. I mean, there's stuff all over the place. And implementing and putting engineering changes because of this are often disruptive and costly, and that cost skyrockets as you get closer and closer to the launch date. The recent study had shown that most companies, 63%, were trying to get faster lead times. They had to do that because the market needs a quick response to these quality issues. They got to get changes out there. They're also bringing in global supply chains. They're changing their requirements and product capabilities. They're reducing their product development. I mean, it's almost a perfect storm. There's all these things going on in companies right now that's putting a lot of pressure on them. And depending on the type of company you're in, and a lot of people don't even understand this part, that I can have a lot of different change processes, if you will. I have one part, and I have multiple change requests against it. So, is there an opportunity, instead of processing 5 independent change requests, we can group them all into one? There's also ones where I have a single change request, but it applies to multiple part numbers. So again, depending on how your parts are defined and documented or drawn or however they're done, now I've got one change going against multiple parts. And then sometimes that part that's being changed affects multiple products. So this part's using 5 other assemblies, and now you got to look at configuration management. So even this slide alone starts to look at, well, wait a minute, what are we talking about? What kind of change requests are we looking at? The biggest thing I've learned over the last 20 years or so working with companies in the area of engineering change is it is absolutely a 4-step process. And we're going to go through the 4 steps. The reason this slide, and this slide alone is probably the most important slide of this discussion, is people use the term ECR, ECN, ECO interchangeably. They think they're all engineering change. Well, they're not. One's requesting the change, should we or should we do it? The other one's saying, hey, we decided to do it, let's get ready. The third one says, everything's ready, let's go. And the fourth one is quite often completely skipped altogether. An engineering change verification, where we actually go out and see if the change did what we expected. So let's look at ECRs, the change requests. Now those can come from your customers or the marketplace, your internal innovation centers, engineers. It might come from your suppliers. Sometimes it's an actual change. Sometimes it's just a temporary deviation or a waiver. And really the whole issue of this first step of the process is should we or shouldn't we do the change request? And you got to look at the impact and the related costs. You got to decide the risk associated with it. Like that previous slide, does this impact one part? Does it impact multiple parts? Does it impact multiple assemblies? I mean, you really have to have a way to understand the impact and the cost of those. The other thing that's really important is where are we in the product life cycle? If you're doing prototyping, I mean, the more the merrier as far as engineering change requests. Get them in, get a lot of them in, change, improve, learn, and update. If you're in pre-production, probably not as fast to approve as prototypes, but hey, we're still in pre-production. Let's learn and adapt. But if you're just ready to go into production, that is a bad time to start getting a flurry of change requests coming in. The other thing that companies struggle with is who gets to vote. There needs to be some kind of rules so that everybody isn't addressing every type of change request. And again, back to should you or shouldn't, this risk issue, I want to highlight that. Is it a safety issue? Is cost the impact, or is it the right thing to do? It's kind of a high cost, but it impacts usability. Is it a short-term or long-term fix? Do we have to stop shipments in manufacturing? When you look at all the related costs, as I mentioned, the product life cycle stage, are you in prototype, pre-production, production? What's the impact of current inventory? What's already been shipped? What's in the warehouse? What's in your plants? What's at a supplier? What's the impact on your reputation? And regarding voting, you got to create some rules, and you usually do that by coming up with like critical, major, minor type changes. Some says, well, a critical one that is one that has a cost impact greater of some number. Again, depending on the size of your company, that might be $500, $50,000, or $5 million. The impact of the products in the field, and if it's a safety issue. But by the way, if it's a safety issue or a product recall issue, that's by definition a Class 1 change. Is it a major issue? What do you mean by that? Well, it's not over this number, it's under this number. It does affect the service organization. It does affect the inventory or what's going on out in the customer field. I mean, we need to look at this seriously. But then there's some minor ones. And the reason this is so important is not necessarily the critical and majors, because the way those have been defined and described, people pay attention to those anyhow by the nature of them. But these minor ones, if you don't define them well, you've got way too many people involved in opinions and decisions about thinking about what's going on. And look, if this doesn't affect inventory, nobody outside the organization's impact, it's less than $500. Nobody in field service is going to know. It's pre-production stuff. Those kind of things that when you classify them, an engineer may have the authority to do those without any other approvals. Maybe the product launch manager does. But without these classifications and some rules about who has to vote on these changes, changes take way too long, and in a lot of areas they never get addressed because it just takes too long. So let's say we do an engineering change request. We came up with our rules, we came up with our classifications, we looked at our risk, we looked at the inventory, and we made a decision, yes, we are going to do this engineering change. The next step is the engineering change notice. Now, the change notice is basically who needs to know what about the change and what do they have to prepare in order to get ready for the change. So, hey, everybody, we're making a change to this part. I mean, obviously, engineering needs to know about it. Who in manufacturing needs to know about it. Who in quality, who in purchasing, does it impact suppliers? Maybe in marketing, we have to change our packaging. Maybe customer suppliers. Again, it all depends on the level of the change. But again, this part is very important because we've decided to do it. Now we're trying to update everybody. And what's interesting, when you look at what needs to be updated, it depends what's impacted. Is there stuff already shipped? Is there stuff in the warehouse? Is it in our plants? Is it at the supplier? What needs to be updated? And this one's interesting because the change notice, in my opinion, is the most labor-intensive, complicated part of the process. There's a lot of things we talked about in engineering change request about should we or shouldn't we, but once you say we're going to update it, you know, do you need customer approval? Do we have to change purchase orders? Do we have the tooling changes? Is there inspection requirements? Of course, the drawings have to be updated. Does it impact material specs? You know, is manufacturing routing change? So I have to change or train employees. Did it impact pricing? Our SOPs, work process. I mean, failure mode and effect. I mean, there's all these related documents that quite often fall through the cracks. Quite often, when the people skip the engineering change notice or think that an engineering change notice is the same as engineering change request, a lot of the stuff gets skipped, which is why we start to have problems. So we made the engineering change request. We decided to do it. We know who we have to notify. Everything's been updated. Engineering knows, manufacturing knows, quality knows, tooling's updated, inspection plans are updated, procedures are done, employees are trained, suppliers are notified. Now we get the engineering change order. The change order says, hey, everything's ready to go, but we still have another decision to make. When do you want me to implement this? Do you want me to do it right now? Do you want me to do it on Friday? Do you want me to do it based on production when I run out of my current stock? You know, again, depending on when you pull the trigger on this, and if you don't think about it, you may inadvertently scrap a bunch of existing parts. So even the change order isn't as simple as do it on this date. You may say, all right, finish this production run and do it on the next setup. Again, that varies a little bit by industry, whether you got serialized parts or traceability issues with, you know, either at the part level or at the lot level. A lot of impact, but again, you got to think about you don't go necessarily the day the change engineering change notice is approved. Now, this last one I mentioned to you is quite often simply skipped in most companies. But if you think about it, if you go through the engineering change request process again, and you look about why did we make this change? What was the reason for it? What were we expecting to happen? Was it supposed to be easier to manufacture? Was it supposed to be easier to assemble, easier to service? Was it supposed to be lower cost? Whatever the reason was, whatever drove that change request, I strongly advise you take the time to do a change verification. And all we're trying to know is, and this is interesting because I've asked a lot of engineering executives this question, what percentage of the changes that you implement did you get what you expected? And the other one that is really scary is what percent of the engineering changes you issued were actually correct? Were you actually told the shop floor or the vendor, this is what we want to do? And I've had companies where the engineering change request accuracy have been low as 30–40%. So one of the other major benefits of doing this is, let's say, for example, yeah, we got exactly what we expected. We get reduced cost, quality improvement got better, manufacturability, whatever it did. Well, if the answer is yes, well, that's great news, first of all. And we need to take the time to look at other parts that we can apply the same change to, the concept of look across and read across. Hey, if it worked over here, is there any other place that we should review to put this in? Maybe a similar program, maybe a similar part. Maybe it's not even part related. Maybe it was a process related and said, man, if it worked on that bracket, we should look over in this area. But no, but also as important, if you get the answer back, no, we did not get what we expected, you really need to start over. Meaning you go right back to the front of the process and go through the change request steps again. Because, you know, by this time you spent a lot of money. I mean, you spent a lot of money thinking about it. You spent a lot of money getting everything updated. You spent a lot of money doing it. Man, just spend another nickel and see if it worked. If it did, leverage it, improve other areas. If it didn't, find out why. Now, the reason that this is one of my favorite presentations is I get calls a lot about, well, John, you know, it's kind of labor intensive, or we bought this big PLM app, or our ERP app said they did change, and it's not really working. What should we do? We really just are using Project and Excel. Well, my first comment is, whether you're a big company or a small company, you have to understand your process. Are there 4 steps or 4 phases or not? I strongly advise you, if your company thinks engineering change is a single step, you're going to continue to have headaches whether you automate it or not. Well, actually, you'll have more headaches if you automate it. So what happens is, there's been companies spend millions of dollars on very elaborate PLM systems only to be disappointed, only for their people to revert back to Excel or other personal productivity tools. Well, why is the reason for that? Because you ran out and bought software before you understood the product life cycle. You didn't understand where the gaps were. You took departments' views. Well, in engineering we do this, and the PLM software did it, so I don't really care about the rest of you. Well, that's great for you, but remember that engineering change notice where I have to update all that stuff? If we don't have a process view and we just focus on departments, no wonder it works good for one department but not your company. So start with a process flow chart. Start with getting your people involved, talking to them, asking them what's going on. Talk about, well, how many of our change requests are just 1 request per product? How many are 5 requests on the same product? How many are this change request impacts 10 products? Those things we talked about at the beginning of this discussion. If you don't put those on the table now, the probability, if you just go out and buy software, it's going to work, that's successful, is probably 1% or less. So again, and I've done this in grease boards with a lot of teams, and it's great when you get the people involved before you run out and buy software. What do you think the engineering change process is? When you do a diagram, you go, oh, we do this, this, and this, and if there's a question, it goes back. But when you actually get people to talk about it and dig into it, it's very complicated. And the reality is it should be pretty simple. I don't mean simple like not time-consuming with all the engineering change notice updates, but it shouldn't be that complicated. This is the request, should we or shouldn't we? How do we decide who gets to vote? All right, we're going to do it. Here's the notice. What has to be updated? Was it updated or not? Change order. When do you want to implement it? Verify that you got what you wanted. Well, again, the challenge is I've got big ERP systems saying we do engineering change. They've gotten better over the year. I don't want to be too negative, but a lot of times an ERP system, they just want to know, am I changing something that's going to impact inventory or cost? Because that's what they're driven by, inventory and cost transactions. A lot of the PLM systems, again, great CAD tools, great design tools. They go, well, we got a workflow engine and we can build whatever you want. Well, again, you can if you know what you want. But if you don't have a process view and you're just trying to make engineering easier, that doesn't help quality, it doesn't help purchasing, it doesn't help marketing, all those other people impacted by it. So you really need an approach that ties everything together, and there's ways to do that with some very simple workflow tools. Now there's tools out there now that let you, instead of doing it in Excel, build a platform on top of it that says, here's all my change requests, here's the form I want to look like. By the way, the tools I'm talking about are business process management and rapid application development tools that the screen or what you're doing will look exactly like your current engineering forms. Okay, which means I don't have to retrain the company, I don't have to train the employees. Remember, we were doing it on this form and we're tracking it in Excel. Now the form is over here, it's in a database, and it's following this workflow process. So your form, not their screen. That's why, by the way, a lot of the bigger systems fail, is because not only does it not follow your process, but the screens, people look at it, but that doesn't even look close to what we do. I mean, there's like 80 fields on there we're never going to use. I don't even know what half those fields mean. So being able to use a rapid development platform that builds exactly what you want, there's little to no training because everybody understands it already. I don't have to change existing documentations and procedures because it's basically what we're doing on paper and Excel. You know, it can enable email, and it makes people's job faster, and they go, okay, thanks, with all the reporting that you'd expect out of it. So the change process, and this is the tagline of PPROSO, is people, process, software. Well, hold on a minute. I know there's some big companies on today, and some of you probably already have PLM software you already bought. If you already bought something, it's time to stand back, get the people in the room, and talk about the process. Push the software aside for a minute, get the people to explain what's going on, what they want to do. Don't even show the software, don't discuss the software, don't log into it, just explain what you want. If you haven't bought any software yet, and you're trying to automate engineering change, same thing, bring the people in, like your existing forms, define the process, and then when you bring vendors in, go to them and say, show me how to do this process in your software. That is probably the most powerful way to engage software vendors on the planet. Don't let a vendor come in and demo their software to you where they're taking control of the discussion and you're passive just trying to figure out all the tabs they're clicking through and all the things they're toggling and going through. You know, when you walk in and say, here's our current form, here's what the process looks like, show me how to do this in your form, when the demo is driven that way, the other thing that's really an eye-opener is you will start to see, which is why a lot of these systems fail, okay, well, to enter it, you got to go here. Now to do this, you got to close out of that and go over here. Now to do this part, it's on tab 4 over in this section. That's why a lot of these systems fails, because when you bring them in, the people said, you know, it used to take me 4 hours to do a change request. Thanks for automating it. Now it takes me 4 days. You can avoid that with the people and process view of it. A lot of business reasons for doing this. You know, when it comes down to looking to automate, or in some cases replacing, I know that's really tough to do. If you can bring new products to market faster, I can get more market share, we can generate more revenue. I'll have a competitive advantage because my new stuff comes out before the competition, cycle times are faster, product costs are lower, more efficient use of my resources, and delivery lead times can be done. Basically, if you have a good, robust process of doing it, even your compliance and risk mitigation is done because I have a rock-solid process with a robust audit trail. The other thing that impacts people a lot is if you don't pay attention when you're making the decisions, and more importantly, when you do the change order that says, when am I going to pull the trigger, you can have a lot of inventory waste. And this is, you know, this first one's interesting. Let's say it takes 5 days for your company to process an engineering change. What that means is I'm a production supervisor. For those 5 days you're thinking about it, I'm making parts. So 5 days later, if you say, yeah, you know what, we shouldn't do that, let's change it to this, that's only 5 days of production. I mean, this is reality. This is the frustration where, you know, sometimes these change requests come down, production goes, really? Really, that simple change? Why couldn't you come down and told me that in 2 hours? So, you know, wrong parts and wrong revision, reduce obsolescence, faster change management with your suppliers. And I didn't really elaborate on the supply chain, but every issue, challenge, risk that I was describing with your internal operations, if you got 10 suppliers, multiply it by 10. If you have 100 suppliers, 100, 500, 500. If you can't get your act together internally on change requests, what do you think you're doing to your supply base? So it really is a supply chain issue, not just an organizational issue. The other thing that's a huge value, and I got to emphasize it again, if you add that change verification step, it feeds information back to engineering. You know, a lot of companies, the only thing they rely on is warranty and field failures and field complaints because they don't know. The companies that I've helped put in change verification, the engineers smile and go, geez, thanks, I didn't know that. Wow, that didn't work? You got to be kidding me. Oh, hey, really appreciate it. Let me try this. If you skip that step, which is probably the easiest to do and the least expensive, you're putting an unbelievable amount of money left on the table. And when you start having information you can look at, let's just look at two new product launches, Part A and Part B. And what we want to talk about, which most executives want to talk about, is the reason we're bringing this new product to market is to make money. So if you were an executive looking at this chart, the program A is blue. We did a lot of change requests in the design phase. Not as many, but still quite a few in prototype. Not as many in pre-production. By the time we hit production, we're pretty good to go. Compared to program B in the red, which one do you think is going to be more profitable? And to people that live in this world, it's like, duh, no brainer, of course. But if you can't present this type of information to your executive team, they're going to go, why did we lose our shirt on that program B, man? I thought that was going to be a winner. Well, because we didn't staff the design engineers we needed at the beginning, because everybody was working over here, and you said you couldn't have any more. And then as these guys got freed up, we started doing more work. But when you put those kind of changes in production, it's going to not be as profitable. And what data like this, again, program A and program B, how fast can we turn around a change request? How fast can we turn around a change order? How long does it take to do change verification, the 4 steps? Well, program A, change request takes about 5 days. It'd be nice if we could do it faster, but 5 days is 5 Bs. Now, program B takes 15 days. Now remember, 15 days I can be making parts to the wrong revision and to something I'm going to change. The change notice, 10 and a little over 20. All right, they take a little longer to get this done. So, wow, not only did it take 15 days to decide, it took another 22 days to get ready. That's 27 days. And then the change order, it takes no time at all. Well, if it's taking all this time up here, I bet you didn't think about it. You pulled the trigger, and apparently you're not even going out to see if it works. Program A is going to be more profitable. It's going to have higher margins. So as a summary, there are 4 steps, not 1. If that's the only thing you got out of today's discussion, hopefully that's worth it to you, because your organization, your suppliers need to understand that. It is unbelievably important to get your people involved in these discussions. Let them understand there's 4 steps. Let them understand what's in the 4 steps. Talk about how we approve them. Talk about different levels and decision criteria. Don't make every minor engineering change a critical issue. A single process is critical. Oh, by the way, here's the other thing I forgot to mention. There are some companies that are very segregated by program, especially in aerospace and even in some automotive industries and some other ones, medical device companies, where every product manager, every product line has their own change request process. It's like, oh man, you got to be kidding me. There's no way I'm going to be able to create any charts or metrics or analysis that makes sense. You do it that way, we do it this way. The Six Sigma people will say reduce variation, do it all the same way. The Lean people will say get rid of all these steps that do nothing. The reason that change request takes 5 days to approve is the first half hour was the engineer decided, and it took 4.5 days for the engineering manager to look at it. That's waste. As far as technology goes, consolidate any standalone tools. Look at the tools like I described that can tie together web forms and business workflow. Whenever you can, use existing enterprise software data. Don't type, retype, don't re-enter. Engineering change management is a huge opportunity for every organization. Anyone that has engineering documents, actually, interesting enough, there's a couple hospitals on today. Even if it's just change management, take engineering out of here, the message is still the same. More revenue, lower cost, lower risk, higher compliance. And if you don't know what's working in your process, if you don't know where the bottlenecks are, how do you know if you need more people or not? How do you know to add people, take people off, reassign people? I've seen people where they're trying to manage all this in spreadsheets, and the classic is John Cachet, the design engineer, is scheduled to do 187 hours of work this week. Well, bummer, because John only works 40 hours a week. You know, if you have inconsistent systems and tracking, you're never going to be able to see that. A little bit about PPROSO. We've been working in business process and rapid solution development for a long time. We help develop your company, your solution to your problems by getting the people to define their processes and looking at software. If anyone on today's discussion is actually wrestling with improving engineering change right now, and I assume some of you are, that's why you took your time out of your schedule today, I'm going to offer you a free proof of concept, and here's what that means. We'll have a phone call to talk about what you're working on, try to understand if there's any business benefit for doing it. You send me your forms, procedures, your workflows that describe what you want. We'll take a look at it, schedule a call to make sure we understand it. And then in one of these BPM tools that I'm alluding to, we'll take your form, we'll take your process, and demonstrate a solution to you that does that, including integration with ERP apps, PLM apps, basically trying to address all this stuff being done outside the enterprise systems in spreadsheets. If we do that, all we ask is that you host, when we're done, to show you what it does and how it works, you bring together the business owners and decision makers to say, boss, you told me to look at this issue, I've done some research, here's a group we worked with, they've taken what we want, exactly what we want, build exactly what we want to solve our problem. Okay, we'll see if there are any questions.